today we continue this conversation with our mayoral candidates for Nashville-Davidson County Mayor. So we meet Senator Jeff Yarbrough. Senator Yarbrough represents us in the Tennessee State Legislature, and he is a candidate for mayor. Again, these conversations will continue. We are asking questions to talk about, to have a better understanding of their vision, and who will represent us. Who will you vote for that will have an impact and that will vastly impact the future of this community, of the community of us here in Nashville, of Black and Brown. So we invite you to get ready to learn more about what is going to happen for us. Good morning, Councilman.
Good morning.
Good. Welcome to the Urban League of Middle Tennessee. It's so good to have you here. And let's get into this mayor's race.
Yes.
You are currently the council member for District 19, which is kind of not where we are, but a sister.
Just up the hill, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And so tell us about your district, but tell us how your district played an important role of you deciding to run for mayor.
Yeah. So it's I would characterize District 19 as the urban core district, right? Because it has all of downtown and the Gulch and a lot of midtown, but it also has the urban neighborhoods on either side of downtown, and so it has a good portion of Edge Hill in the district, and then it has the Napier and Sudicum communities kind of out south. Right. And then it comes up into the urban neighborhoods like Germantown, Salemtown, Hope Gardens, historic Buena Vista, and then even goes over to Fisk University. Yep. So it's, I think to me, it really is it's the heart of the city and where it's located, but it's also the heart of the city in that it has these three major cultural identity corridors in it of Jefferson Street, Broadway, and Music Row. Yep. And I think all three of those basically come together in the district, and it's been very interesting to deal with everything from more public housing than any other council district, but also more kind of urban development in downtown than anybody else is looking at. I mean, we've had more growth, and then it's also this question of, okay, you do have traditional single-family neighborhoods, many of them historically Black, and so what are the policy tools that are available to both keep things affordable, but also try to not let gentrification overwhelm all of that part of North Nashville in particular. And so I think for me, in looking at the city as a whole, if there is an issue in the city that we need to deal with on a citywide basis, chances are I've dealt with it in some way in District 19, right? From crime and poverty issues to schools, because we have everything from priority schools at the elementary school level up to some of the nation's best schools, but they're magnet schools, and so there's a lot of that, all the way through economic opportunity. And then, some of what we've seen with what I would consider to be an almost overheated part of our destination economy with the entertainment district downtown. But infrastructure too, because we see, the same issues with sidewalks and potholes and basic city services, but we have all of those things too, of parks, libraries, schools, community centers. And so I feel very well equipped to take the skills and experience that I've had in Metro and apply those on a citywide basis.
So with because District 19 has culturally changed as to Nashville natives.
Yep.
We've watched it blossom, but also too, as you spoke to it, you have the economic engine with downtown.
Yep.
And so as mayor, let's talk about downtown, and particularly because we are here at the Urban League, and we are talking about Black and Brown, how downtown, what the epitome of downtown can do to help, share some of its wealth, particularly in North Nashville, as well as even Southeast, what that money can do to help prosper Nashville.
So I think this is one thing I've been very overall attentive to, but concerned about too, because when I took office, we would hear a lot about the promise of downtown. And I think Mayor Cooper actually tried to do some things that were pretty important. He looked at the convention center, for instance, and said this should be like he came into office saying our tourism economy should help the rest of the city.
Right.
We started down that road just last year when we were trying to take surplus from the convention center
Right.
and put it into affordable housing.
Right.
That's a really good idea.
Right.
Well, before we even got very far with it, the state stepped on that. And they said, no, you can't use funding sources from the tools that we years ago partnered with you all to build the convention center.
Right.
They have become so antagonistic as a state legislature
Right.
that they said you're not going to be able to use this anymore. So what it means is, the good news is, Nashvillians almost a decade ago came together in Nashville Next and said, we prefer that if we're going to grow, we'd rather see that happen in major centers like downtown,
Right.
or sometimes on the corridors, like along our major pikes and big collector streets and everything. And I think that formula has actually worked out pretty well. The good news for the city going forward is, as we have tried to keep downtown the place where the growth happens and have less of it impact our neighborhoods, even
Right.
our urban neighborhoods, like the one I live in, just around the corner in Salem Town, and I've lived there for 16 years, we've had mostly successes in that regard, and that means we have a much, much bigger property tax base in downtown. Nashville Yards, right, where
Yep.
Amazon is building towers, where we've got a big hotel, we've got some residences being built right now. There's going to be childcare there, and some entertainment, new entertainment features there. But that used to be Lifeway's campus.
Right.
That was dozens of acres that produced no property taxes. Now that's going to start producing tens of millions of dollars per year
Right.
that we just didn't have before.
Right.
Right. And so that's all online. Well, that gets to help all 500 square miles of Nashville. And so I'm actually excited and optimistic about what we can do going forward to push that money out. I think to the other point about the tourism piece, I'm interested in the next little bit of, look, we know that we woke up Bachelorette Nation as a city. We know that people have come downtown to experience the entertainment district, but we also have built new cultural assets, right? I want our cultural tourism to pick up so that people come to the National Museum of African American Music,
Right.
and they do programs around the city.
Right.
And so having that as a new cultural asset is a big deal, but we want them to be on the map nationally because it's a national museum.
Right. And we don't have a dedicated art district in Nashville. So when you go to cities like Houston and Dallas and you see those dedicated districts, and I'm quite sure with us being Music City USA, that arts comes with music as far as, so as you know, you think about that and the impact of wanting to drive more traffic into the African American Music Museum. How that also that plays in education too, right?
It does.
As a mayor, like the chief of tourism, the chief of urban, and the chief of so many things. What other things do you see in a O'Connor administration that will breathe lifeblood into our city?
Yeah. So this is. What you said about the arts district is a really good point. We had started conversations a few years ago about turning Fifth Avenue of the Arts into an arts district, all the way from, you could even think of it running from the convention center to TPAC. We even had some of these neighborhoods further up have some interest in it. Germantown has had a public art program. COVID happened. We had galleries, close. We've had new ownership at the arcade and some uncertainty about whether that, because, for years we had this downtown art crawl. Well, by the time COVID happened, we had these three amazing urban art crawls. We had the downtown one anchored on that Fifth Avenue of the Arts. We had a Germantown one, but then we had this amazing Jefferson Street art crawl, right? And so Woodcuts was a part of that back when we still had, the Garden Brunch Cafe. They were a part of it. One Drop Inc. has been a part of it. What I have heard in just the past few months is that the Jefferson Street art crawl might come back.
Okay.
And I think that would be really good. I think it's important for a mayor to personally celebrate those things. As a district council member, I always tried to uplift those things, and encourage people to come out and experience those. I think things like the Jefferson Street Sound Museum, if you can kind of link that and Lorenzo's incredible work to preserve the cultural history there.
Right.
I don't know as many people know this, but he's got a recording studio in there.
Right.
If at some point, when I moved into Salem Town 16 years ago at the corner of Rosa L. Parks Boulevard and Jefferson Street, there was a sign there that said future home of what was then called the National Museum of African American Music, Art, and Culture. That became the State Museum.
Well, it's still in the district.
It's still in District 19.
But it moved from what was in the urban.
And the reason I was so excited about that is because as a native Nashvilleian, I didn't know as much about it when I was a child, but coming back here as an adult, my dad had done a radio show over at WFSK when we were growing up. And so I had started to understand both the history but also the trauma of I-40 and Jefferson Street.
Right.
And I was excited to have a place where you could have live music on Jefferson Street again. And I think that's what I want to focus on. It's a thing that we tried several different approaches over the past 8 years, but I think as a mayor, we watched, for instance, Mayor Cooper lead this great partnership to create a new incubation center at Fisk University.
Yep.
I think there is an opportunity still to invest capital in Jefferson Street to bring live music back to Jefferson Street.
And while he talks about that, I think I saw, was it this past week that you were DJing? So,
yes. Music City is very much a part of my heritage.
So, we have a mayor that DJs. Okay, so let's talk about this. We are one day away that tomorrow that our Community Oversight Board will be no more.
Yeah.
And with that, we know that in 2018, I know I voted for it.
Yep.
And across this county, more than 130,000 people voted for, which is probably more than what a mayor would ever get in an election in Nashville.
Honestly, it was that turnout, right? I mean, that showing that, I don't expect that many people to vote in this.
Yeah. It would be nice, and I'm going to encourage that, more than 133,000 people go vote in August for this election. But as we creep into that, tomorrow the CLB will vastly change.
Yes.
And as of right now, we know that the current administration has not filed a lawsuit. What do you think about? Would you, if you were mayor right now, would that be a part of what your administration would do? Would file a lawsuit?
So, three things on that, I guess I would say. One, I'm a co-sponsor of a bill that is already filed in Metro Council. We will consider it on second reading on Tuesday.
Well, actually, first
Thursday.
reading on Thursday because it was pushed back because of budget.
And, that's right.
And we'll talk about the Morris building too, because that was a big part of the last council meeting.
But we have a bill that is moving to reconstitute the oversight board consistent with state law. The good news is the state law altered the powers, but it did not say you can't do civilian oversight.
Right.
The second thing is, I think because of that and looking at the way they did it, Metro Legal, who I talk to regularly, has a fairly consistent strategy of being able to push back. And so, for instance, several months ago, we won a lawsuit
to keep the council.
To keep the council.
Right.
But here's the thing. We kept the council. We made sure that there would be an election with 40 council members this August.
Right.
By 2027, the state does have probably the authority to shrink the council again. So the rest of that bill may come back in some way, but at least we will have the opportunity to have community conversations. Planning won't have to do this 30-day absurd sprint to come up with maps. And I think what I'm looking at as I talk to legal is they're being very, I'll say it this way, they are trying very hard to engage in legal activity that they think they can win the lawsuit.
So let me say this is, you voted for it, I voted for it, and the fact of the things that come before the CLB has vastly impacted people that look like me.
Yes.
And so that's why, so when you had your conversation with Metro Legal, are you saying that they are not filing a lawsuit because they don't think that they could win?
I think part of the issue is they thought they had a very strong legal argument on the council piece. They could file a lawsuit, but I guess I would say it would not advance the cause of preservation of civilian oversight, because the legal arguments that they would be making, the state has the authority to do this, right? And they have done it. If they were just doing it in Nashville, that would be one thing.
That would be just cause, but
because it's impacting other cities around Tennessee.
It's impacting us in Memphis because we're the two cities that have the most.
But I think it impacted Knoxville as well. I need to go back and look.
They were already functioning as, so as of tomorrow, July 1st, our Community Oversight Board will become a advisory committee,
right.
Which basically what is already in Knoxville. Because they don't have the authority. So what happens is the Oversight Board will lose the authority to subpoena, which, as we talk about, you already brought it up as being a co-sponsor, which will put it in the hands of council, because that way, one, removing it from the board and putting it to council, so then they have to come find a council member. It's and asking the council.
It's an extra step. I guess the third point I would make there is, so I guess I would say it this way: I'd be unlikely to direct Metro Legal to file a lawsuit that they were saying we think we're going to lose this, but I would have that conversation to make sure that I understood the legal arguments. I'm definitely going to make sure we get this while I'm in office, that we get the oversight process reconstituted, at least, because people need to know that, one, yes, the mayor's office already with Mayor Cooper took action with Metro Legal, with council, and we did everything that we could under current state law. But I'll say, too, as mayor, there's nothing that is in that state law that says the mayor can't ensure a robust civilian oversight process too, and we're going to have that conversation. I want to make sure, whether it's Director Fitchard or Chief Drake, who I assume will still be there by October in their respective roles as Chief of Police and Director of the Community Oversight Board. All three of us will sit down and we will figure this out. And the part that Metro Legal will probably be most instrumental in then is, do we need a new memorandum of understanding? And what will that say? Because I want that to ensure that we have, again, as much legal authority as possible in the oversight process.
So I can tell you that the Urban League will be right there with you. We are in support of the Community Oversight Board.
That is very good to know.
We know that, how much of an impact and what it's going to do to slow down the process for the things that are happening. So we would say, we'll be right there with you, asking questions, doing what we can, because this is going to, have a vast impact on what's going to happen in the community.
It is.
So let's talk about some of the things that you just released a new commercial.
Indeed.
And the theme of the commercial looks like it's sports, and you're instead of being councilman, you're Coach O'Connell. Leading up, and let's talk about some of the things because you used a what I would say a slogan to say of let's get Nashville to work for you. How is
Nashville for Nashvillians?
How and I can say that there's some things that aren't working. A lot of people, depends on what side of town you live on. Some of us are paying for trash to be picked up, and some of us are not. There's always the conversation about sidewalks, but when I think about your slogan, I also think about it for how it's having the vast impact for Black and Brown, whether it's the wages that aren't being fully everyone being paid what they should be paid. It's affordable housing. And that still goes to that. And then it's also transportation, because what happens on this side of town does not really happen on the other side of town.
Yep.
So let's talk about, some of those things. So let's start from the ladder. Let's talk about transportation.
Yep.
And what your administration would do, particularly how it will have an impact on the mobility, but on Black and Brown, because they tend to be the most riders.
Right. So I'm a former chair of our Nashville MTA Board of Directors, right? So our transit authority. While I was on the MTA board, we did our first ever long-range transportation plan, right? And it was designed to outlast any individual board member's term, outlast any political cycle. It is a long-term strategic plan. It's called In Motion. Now, it's there with lots of ideas. It doesn't say, hey, specifically put routes, or hey, put this kind of service with these stops. Like, it doesn't get that detailed, but it does have a map with anticipated growth, what we know about service levels today, what we know about ridership levels today. And that plan is still in effect. And in what is now WeGo Public Transit, they rebranded a few years ago.
Right.
They refresh that plan periodically.
Mm-hmm.
You know that 5 years ago we had a referendum on a much bigger transit plan.
And it busted.
That it did not pass, but it had, the point of the referendum in many ways was, yes, we're going to scale up, but we're also going to get dedicated funding for transit. When you do that, a few things happen. It means now bus service and the routes, like if you have a fuel crisis or anything else, you are no longer competing that major piece of your affordability and your mobility toolkit against things like schools and police and sidewalks. Mm-hmm. Instead, it's over here. This is still a good goal for the city, and we are actually one of the last major American cities not to have some kind of dedicated funding for transit.
So, and why do we not have dedicated funding for transportation? Does it mean that Nashville doesn't care about transportation, or are we just been behind the eight ball?
I think a few things. It took us longer than a lot of other cities to build the political will to get there.
Okay.
You have found, I think, that, I'll just say, in the past, we have focused more on economic development and maybe some on education, but for whatever reason, I think there's just been some assumptions made.
The dots just have not been connected.
Well, and I think there's been this conventional wisdom that, Nashville's a car city. But the truth of the matter is, and I can say this from the 7 years I was on the MTA board, transit is one of those things where if you build it, people ride.
That's right.
If you create a bus route into a community, people are going to use that.
Right.
If you increase those frequencies so that it's coming more than once an hour, people are going to ride it.
Right.
Every single time we increased service levels, do you know what happened? It wasn't that ridership kept up. Ridership increased. Right. For 7 years, and this was while we were just under Mayor Dean making incremental investments in transit. We saw our ridership growth grow faster than our population growth.
Right.
That's exactly where you want to be.
In words of Kevin Costner, if you build it, they will come.
Transit is that.
Yeah.
And it's also a very, very quick path to affordability, because most households, their two biggest costs are the raw cost of mortgage, rent, utilities, right? The cost of housing, and transportation.
And we see it here from Urban League standpoint. Our CEO, Clifton Harris, is always talking about the fact that if you give them, if they have a job, so goes a job, goes your transportation. And we know that everyone's not gonna be able to afford a car, or nor do they want to drive. A lot of us are born here in Nashville, and we have left and come back. I used to live in D.C., and I like the opportunity of multiple opportunities.
If you've been away to college, if you've been away for a professional opportunity, if you, frankly, these days, if you are growing up now and you've got the opportunity to hang out with your friends, you'd rather be on your phone than behind the wheel.
Exactly.
And driver's license applications have fallen off over the past few years.
Right.
Because younger people
they don't
prefer to be driving.
Millennials and then the generation behind, they are not interested in driving. And so talk about, because like say for instance, the big problem is if you live you leave outside this urban core. So when you go to South Nashville, even if you live in Bellevue and Belmead, is that you get on the bus, you have to come downtown, and then you have to go back to wherever.
So
How
this
do we
was
fix that?
the best thing in what we got from In Motion when Mayor Barry took office, when I had just got elected to council. And this was tough because I got into a little bit of a fight at that time with a mayor who was really trying to go after it, because I felt like we needed to do a both and approach. And I understand the reasons, because it was very complicated financing, but they wanted to just do the dedicated funding piece. But in that window, we put on our desks this great work plan that built community transit centers in multiple parts of the city, specifically so you didn't have to just come downtown every time. When you put community transit centers and bring routes right into the communities, and you allow crosstown routes, you shorten people's commutes. That gives them more time with their families. That gives them less time that they have to take getting to work. It makes it easier for people to think about. Even a few days a week, I might not have to drive my car and sit in traffic. And we're still ready to go with that. But over the past 6 years, we barely made any investments in transit.
So I would take it that your administration would move forward with that.
In fact, we would. And I'll tell you,
Okay.
in this budget, which is the budget that the next mayor will inherit in October, right? You mentioned July 1st. Yes, we know what's going to happen with the COB. Just last week, we passed a $3.2 billion budget. Well, I expect to be ready on day one. And on day one, I now know, because of behind the scenes work I did to get in this budget, we have $2.8 million specifically to add and expand crosstown service. We have an additional several $100,000 to get transit service added to the brand new James Lawson High School, because while they knew where that school was going to be, nobody had done the planning to do the transit service out there. And so those two things will be ready for the next mayor on day one.
So how much money would you also dedicate additionally to what is already there, or try to seek after? Because you're going to go after to expand that federal funding, correct?
Yes. So we have 3 things that we should be doing. So the state just passed a major $26 billion infrastructure package, right? We need to do everything we can within that to make sure on state roads in particular, where potholes are some of the worst in the city, we get the state. If you look at our interstates and state routes right now, those are some of the worst potholes in the city. That we get just state of good repair stuff done with that. That we take any multimodal, like, transit specific or greenways or, bikeways and sidewalks, that any of the stuff that is in that infrastructure package, we're ready to go there. We have the federal piece where we have both the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. I've already begun conversations with the National League of Cities, USDA, which has some availability there. We have to be ready to go with those major federal opportunities immediately. And then 2 things locally. We will continue to advance that We Go work plan, which we already know the financing, and they've actually updated it at my request over the next 3 years, so that by the end of this term, we should be able to see meaningful advancements for the things that are useful, popular, visible, and cost-effective. And while we do that, we will restart the conversation about dedicated funding.
So I talked about, you left here and went to school and came back, and so did I. Well, let's talk about regional transportation, because I don't think that there is a lot of conversation that is given and dedicated to us partnering with our, surrounding counties, as people like to say, the donuts. So talk about that impact of working with our, other mayors. Because they play a role into this. Rutherford County has blossomed because of, and so has the budget and everything else in Williamson County, and so are the other counties. Talk about regional transportation.
Yeah, this is so important, and actually it's crazy to me that it has been 15 years since I did this, but 15 years ago, I went out on a trip to Denver with Mayor Dean, specifically to look at how they did regionalism and how it impacted their transit and transportation future. Denver had 2 things going that we did not have at the time. They had a regional nonprofit focused on transit and transportation, and they also had a regional caucus of mayors. Denver proper, which is the gorilla in the room, just like Nashville is for us in a 10-county region. But there's city and county mayors outside of Denver all said, by working together, we make the entire area better able to thrive. We, reduce the impact of sprawl. We reduce the impact of congestion. And Mayor Dean did something smart. He came right back here, stole those ideas, and put them to effect in Nashville.
Well, I wouldn't say steal, because in Urban League, we like to say copy, paste, and modify.
That's even better.
And I would encourage...
I'm going to copy, paste, and modify that.
and make it work for Nashville.
Yeah.
So, as we teeter...
Just real quickly.
Yeah, please do.
So we have now the Transit Alliance of Middle Tennessee. It is a regional nonprofit. We also have a mayor's caucus that Mayor Dean helped initiate. I'm a former board member of Cumberland Region Tomorrow, which is a nonprofit that tries to help with planning toolkits and other things, including transportation. And when I was on the MTA board, we worked directly with that mayor's caucus because transit is still so important to our city and county mayors. The other part of this that's so important is when we reinvest in that regional approach, then Nashville is actually not standing alone when we go back to the state, because our city and county allies in those regions.
And it makes it better for us to get more money.
Correct.
And I think that we don't do enough of that. I think that, one of our problems have been that we don't play well in the sandbox with others, which is probably why we have problems with the state, because we have to figure out how to give a little, take a little. But let's talk about public safety.
Yeah.
I was just on Wednesday out with a friend, and we're unicorns, and they embrace us when they talk to us. But they were talking about crime, and I said, "Well, explain to me, what do you mean about some of the crime?" I said, because there are certain things that are constant. I mean, you've been to your fair share of community meetings, and
Absolutely.
our police officers come, and it's some of the same reports are constantly when you're leaving things in your car. It's summer now, and people leave their doors unlocked, and things are being stolen. So it's gonna be purses, and it's always at the top, where they're getting guns. But let's talk about Mayor O'Connor's public safety plan. And when you talk about that, can you also talk about different interventions like group violence interventions, which we are building up in partnership with Mayor Cooper's office. So let's talk about that.
I was so excited about this because after the Covenant school shooting, I was looking all across the country at things that work in cities to reduce gun violence. Because here's what I'll say. Unfortunately, Nashville is in this terrible scenario where the state of Tennessee has actually moved in the wrong direction on things that we know from evidence still allow people to enjoy whatever Second Amendment rights they want to, but are common sense things. And it turns out when you create a state that across the state is open carry with permitless access to weapons, and you don't do anything to put responsibility measures in place, like secure storage of guns and vehicles, and instead go the other way and say, you can store your guns in your car without them being secure, well, imagine what happens. We have had the worst epidemic for the past decade since these policies were put in place of year-over-year increases in guns stolen from vehicles.
Right.
Well, you and I both know that someone who steals a weapon from a vehicle is not intending to use that for lawful purposes.
Exactly.
And so this is a problem. My hope is that the special session will go forward with the state legislature in a few weeks, that they will come out of it with a few improvements. Specifically, storage in vehicles would be a step in the right direction. Right now, we can't even make a citation.
Right. Which, and I don't even think that the majority is even looking to even go in that direction.
I understand. I'll say it this way. Despite what we have all been through and what Nashville has been through specifically as a city, but even before Covenant, we knew that gun violence was impacting our youth. Lionel Matthews was working on these issues with Mayor Berry back in 2016. I worked with him for the better part of a year on that Youth Violence Summit, because as soon as I took office in the Napier and Sudicum communities, I was having my young constituents get shot and unfortunately a couple times killed.
Yeah, right.
So gun violence has been impacting young people even before Covenant. and it still needs serious attention. And so I want to make sure that the work, this is one of the best collaborations I've had with the Cooper administration, is working first with John Bunton, but for all of that time with Ron Johnson as well.
Mm-hmm.
The model that created the village and
Yes.
that where group violence intervention is coming about,
Mm-hmm.
we have been doing it on the ground in Napier. And when I first took office, we would see almost a homicide a week out there. And too often, it would be also young people getting caught in the crossfire.
Right.
Well, first we took the policing approach and we got the housing authority and the police to work together. And we started doing more community policing, which actually worked.
Right.
It was not just having flashing blues roll through Napier, it was having officers get out of the cars, build relationships in the communities. It worked. But what has worked even better is when we started these on-the-ground investments in nonprofits that are already there.
Right.
Recycle, Reinvest is one of my favorites, and they go out and do community cleanups. They involve young people in that. It is led by someone who has been through the criminal legal system, but they know how to engage young people. They know how to engage the community. Their outcomes produce beautification so that it looks like people, because it's true that they do, they are caring about the community. They are looking after it, making it less filled with litter and trash, and that's a big deal on the ground in a small way. Walk Bike Nashville came in as a part of that. We got traffic calming on those streets, including Charles E. Davis, one of the widest streets in Napier, and now you can't as easily roll in there at high speed, commit a crime, pull a trigger, and roll back out.
Right.
That's safer. We fixed dozens of streetlights, and then that Community Safety Partnership Fund investment means we have a lot of on-the-ground organizations, and it's so exciting for me to know that Urban League is a part of this, because they were already looking at supporting violence interruption, but as soon as you do group violence, it takes it a whole next step, and it's one of the things we've seen be effective elsewhere. So I am 100% committed to continuing the work of the Office of Community Safety, finding a long-term, stable home for the village that outlasts this administration, my administration. It is such a good model, and we need partners like you all to be back there.
Thank you. And so as we talk about that portion, we also know that during the last CLB meeting this week, they also received a report from the LPRs. The pilot will come to an end the 22nd of July. And there is a lot to unpack from there.
Yes, there is.
Nothing that I don't think that I know that we did not foresee that was going to, bring light to it. But I think what it does, it couples. Have you looked at that report?
I have.
And let's talk about the impact. And we know that in Quadrant A, which is North Nashville and East Nashville, and I guess East Nashville kind of picks up on that other side where I guess from District 5. So with the Dickinson Road and that Trinity Lane portion, which is it's a lot going on right through there because you have a lot of those motels that drag, that's still, having some issues.
Quick interstate access, that legacy of some of those hotels out there. I'll say two things about LPRs, right? So we've known about this technology for a long time, and it is true that it is a tool in the law enforcement toolkit, but it is also true that no jurisdiction that has implemented LPRs has seen a sharp fall off in crimes, right? It is not clear that it is serving as a meaningful deterrent to crime. It is a way that you can potentially increase the probability that you will catch someone who has committed a crime, but it is not really bending the curve in terms of crimes committed. I'll say my background professionally, academically, is computer science. I have been somewhat skeptical of mass surveillance because I have followed security for a long time. Even in Metro, we have had significant security breaches in the past 20 years. If you store personal data about somebody, it will inevitably at some point get hacked. That could be a ransomware attack. That could just be somebody with access to the data who shouldn't have it. It could be released publicly by an organization that is just trying to demonstrate that they have hacked something and can release things. If that happens, here's what my skepticism has always been about. There are people in this city that do everything about their lives completely legally. And a lot of times we've heard the argument, well, I don't do anything illegal, so I don't care about this. Well, you might not do anything illegal, but there may still be something that you are doing that's private. If you are going through a divorce, if you have a physical or mental health condition that you have not wanted to disclose to people outside your immediate family or even sometimes in your immediate family, if you are a victim of something, if you are in a scenario where domestic violence is occurring, the last thing in the world you want is your stalker or abuser to know where you are.
Correct.
LPRs have the capacity to track movements around a city. And when that data is taken together, it's not just one camera and, oh, we're only looking up if you have committed a crime. If that data is persisted for 24 hours and I'm sitting there and I've got hacked access to that, and now I take it over several days, I take it over several months.
Right.
Now I know where you've been all around the city.
Right.
And
your footprint.
And my phone, I could leave it at home.
Right.
My car might not track those movements.
Right.
But as soon as the public apparatus is tracking you, then we have an obligation now to protect your privacy. And I'm not convinced that we're going to be able to do that in all cases that matter. And so if the thing that I would want to avoid at all costs is that somebody who should not have access to that data actually then commits a crime based on that data.
Right.
That would be awful.
And so, because we know, prior to the LPRs came about, is at 37208 is the most incarcerated.
Yes.
And so it kind of coupled with that that came out.
Right.
And then we also see where it is producing where higher poverty rates. So taking what you know from that, and as you talk about what could happen, people breaking in security, how does an O'Connor administration build upon and also maintain the trust of people in Nashville-Davidson County if you're going to continue to use those LPRs? So
this is what I'm always surprised by. You may remember Mayor Berry did this thing that happened one time, and it was called Real Talk.
Okay.
And it brought 1,000 people into the conversation about race politics in Nashville at the convention center.
Yep.
And it was amazing. Mm-hmm. I sat at a table meeting people I had never met, who I'm still in touch with, and we had fascinating conversation for the better part of a morning. And I think that's actually really important, because what we tend to do is we go out and have a fight and we say an issue is resolved. And so we had this fight over LPRs. Mm-hmm. But in that fight, what I saw was several of the organizations that have credibly and for a long time joined by newer organizations representing our black and brown community specifically said, we do not have trust in this right now.
Right.
Well, the next thing we need to do when this pilot is concluded is sit down together, not have the LPR piece just come back to council and say we'd like to extend it. Before we do that, what I want to do is have MMPD, MNCO, and the organizations that were most skeptical of this, that saw the future harms, go over this data together.
Right.
Because the data that's there right now looks, unfortunately, like what we saw in Driving While Black in Nashville.
Right. And so with that, one, I'm happy to offer that the Urban League will be happy to be a part of those conversations.
For you all to be a part of that.
But also, too, I think that, right now, it is the conversation is, should this stop? You got, starting tomorrow, we'll start the clock in 21 days.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that it's vastly impacting. And it's not that, and I think if I remember the conversation too, it was one council member that was pushing for this because of some of the drag racing that was going on.
Which I understand.
Which, that's a whole nother bag of nuts. But the fact of the matter is that now we see the impact that it has had, and where they are.
Yeah.
And and it's like multiple. So it starts off here. There's another one at this stop, and like you said that they're trying to catch because it's trying to read, but it's also becoming invasive, intrusive, and it's everything that people know that technology can do, but it is hurting, a community.
And that's where we didn't really have a public conversation about where we were going to put these cameras, right? We didn't say, hey, we're basically not going to put any of these in West Nashville or, Southwest Nashville and richer, whiter parts of the city. But that's, if you look at the map of placements now, so now we have to do two things. We have to talk about the placement of the cameras.
Right.
We have to look at the data of what the hits have been and what there has been, because that's the other piece that concerns me. I shared two stories before we started this. One was personal, one was next door. In Mount Juliet, a Nashville woman was incorrectly arrested and wound up being handcuffed by a false hit on LPRs.
Mm-hmm.
She was a woman of color.
Yep.
This was an example of someone being, on the wrong side of that, and it is indicative of where trust gets broken because of that. Right. She was unjustly arrested and accused, and for my part personally, I had money taken out of my bank account by an LPR private parking garage without my permission, and it turns out they had matched my license plate number to a different state, and money was taken out of my account without my permission over that. And they were wrong.
Right. And so those are two problems, and one that's actually things that can go to the Community Oversight Board. But, and I look forward to, the conversation, too, because you still have time on the council, because I think that you're also going to need that.
Yep.
But as, should you become mayor, I think that there's going to have to be some vast movement conversations, but also too some ways to have some better, greater impact.
So you've raised a couple of the issues here, right? Because I think there's sometimes in a little bit of tension in how we do public policy, and that's why I think these tough conversations are actually so necessary. There is concern about crime. We hit historic lows in Nashville a few years before COVID.
Right.
And after COVID, we've seen across the country crime is ticking back up.
You need to go to work.
Well, it is something we should be concerned about as a city, because particularly with gun violence and knowing that state policies are going to continue to increase the probability of gun violence, we need to be doing all of the things that we can in that regard. But if we're going to use technology like LPRs, if we're going to change our strategy about policing, we have to do that with as much trust from the public, particularly from communities that have been most impacted by it in unjust ways.
Yes, exactly. So as we come to a close, I want you to talk about, explain to Nashvillians why I vote for Councilman Freddie O'Connor for mayor. So look at the camera and...
All right, which one am I looking at here?
Yeah, okay. Go right for it.
Yeah, so this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much to the Urban League for facilitating it.
Thank you for joining us.
You all have also been a partner to the city in many regards, both as we have looked at the Promise Zone implementation in Nashville, all the way up through more recent conversations about community benefits and how we deliver equity and economic development. As mayor, those are things that I think are critically important. I think the mayor is supposed to be in so many ways a partner in chief. We have watched some of our critically important partnerships both in the city with nonprofit communities, with the process of economic development, with thinking about our future, with our regional partners. I think some of it has been metro volatility, but a lot of it has fallen apart over the past few years. I want to get back to being a partner in chief. I want to unlock all of the potential that comes from that. Fundamentally, though, I think this election is one about priorities and preparedness. And to me, that's why I come back to that phrase in Nashville for Nashvillians. My priority is the people of this city. One of the best defenses we have against an aggressive state is to invest in ourselves, to use the power of the mayor's office, the spending priorities, the executive capabilities, to simply make it easier to stay in Nashville. I have heard a disturbing number of people tell me over the past year in particular that they are thinking of leaving, and some of that is because the state is making them feel unwelcome, whether they are in our communities of color, whether they're in our LGBT communities, whether they are simply women in many cases. they are thinking of leaving, but some of it is cost of living, some of it is quality of life. And to me, as mayor, I know we have done a lot of investing in putting Nashville on the map. Well, we're on the map now.
Right.
And now it's time to refocus our energy on being a great place to live. And so I'm running for mayor because I want people to stay. It's also an election about preparedness, though. And this comes back to that day one piece. And that is why I fought so hard, not just in this campaign about the ideas that we're putting out there, but we already know what the mayor is going to have available on day one. We already know for year one what is going to be available because of the budget we just approved. I put the things in the budget that I want to make sure we have as priorities. We had money for transit that was not in the mayor's recommended budget because I went and fought for it. We had money for public employees, cost of living adjustments, because I and several other council members know that that is so important in a city that's cost of living is growing up. We had money, $2 million additional for the arts. All of this without tax increases. This is about priorities. But those are the pieces that I wanted in this budget so we could start on day one. And so that's what I would say is my priority is you. I'm ready on day one. I'd love to earn your vote. And thank you to you and Urban League for this conversation.
Well, thank you, Councilman, for joining us. We know that you got a long weekend ahead of you.
Independence Day is right out there on the other side of the weekend.
That's right. It's my mom's birthday.
Is it?
So
Happy birthday. There you
on
go.
4th of July.
Oh, wow.
But, thank you for joining us. We look forward to having continued conversations with you. One, as you continue your seat as a council member, because we still have a lot of business before you are.
You know how to get in touch with me, and you
Yes.
know I will respond.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Great.